Thank you, Yale. And thank you, Jimmy. It's such a privilege to share the stage with you. And I know that one of my ex-bosses decided to sit at the back in order not to make me nervous. Thank you for doing that. Essentially, what I'll try to do today is I represent the civil society, but today I thought what would be more productive is to look at what climate change means for us and maybe perhaps what Bhutan needs to do as a country. I think we all agree that we live in very, very uncertain times. Last year at this time, we had one of the record snowfalls in Bhutan. I think even Punakha had snow. And this year, if you look at our peaks, they're still barren. There's no snow. I don't know about you, I'm still pining for snow. And I think most Bhutanese are. Our collective angst is growing. And maybe because of that, I think like some speakers have said, maybe that's where there's a lot of angst amongst our youngsters as well. The world is unraveling right in front of our eyes. Okay. You have heard this before. This is nothing novel. Climate is changing. You have heard previous speakers saying that the degree is like 1 degree or something, which has changed already. But it's more dramatic here in our part of the world. Our Himalayas, particularly the high reaches of the Himalayas, it's warming upwards of 2 degrees Celsius, which means landscapes which used to be white is increasingly going to be gray. And this is not far-fetched. It's got immense consequences for us. It's basically, some people are terming it the great thawing of the third pole. Everything is melting. So you will see here, one of the regions in Bhutan, it's showing the 3 big lakes which were at risk. And I think in 2009, desperate times call for desperate measures, I think. An impossible task. We had hundreds of people up there at Thothormi, and this project ran from 2009 to 2012, I think, $3.4 million funded by the LDC fund. And after 4 or 5 years, the lake was supposed to be reduced by 5 meters. I don't know whether that was done or not. And in fact, it was an enterprise against nature itself. And there's no winning when we pit against nature itself. But they said that the lake was reduced by 4 point something. We still don't know. I think the lake is still a threat. You have heard this before. Now vectors are climbing higher and higher. Mosquitoes have been recorded in Lunana. Many of you must have watched Yak in the classroom. Maybe next it's mosquitoes in the classroom. Paro, whatever his name is. Most consequentially, I think for our part of the world, this is something which is not discussed enough, is the monsoons. Responsible for almost 1/4 of our people in the world, responsible for our agriculture, responsible for refilling our water aquifers. This monsoon is changing dramatically. Again, what was once familiar is no longer familiar. It's not falling on time, it's becoming erratic, and when it comes, it's pouring. Yeah. So this will affect everything from the way we do agriculture to the way we manage our water resources. You can see this picture which sums it up. Climate change, this picture sums up climate change for me. A year of hard work gone. How do we protect the most vulnerable to something like the changing monsoons? Not so much talked about, not so much discussed about, but fire is going to be a major threat across the Himalayas. What some of our modeling exercises have shown is that broadly forests which have not been burning so far will end up burning. So from now till the end of the century, most of Bhutan could go up in flames. In fact, this is not so far-fetched as some of us might not want to believe. From Australia to the Mediterranean, if you see, to California, they're all going up in smoke. If it goes up in smoke, then we have a problem because we can no longer be carbon negative. If our forest goes up, we're done. Bhutan's image of being carbon negative is finished. Today, even if we double our carbon emissions, we will still be negative. And in fact, we may be one of the only truly carbon negative countries in the world if we do our metrics right. And because of where we are one of the least emitters in terms of per capita emissions, right? You can see the United States, of course, is right up on the top together with China, and the world average is about 7.4. So we fall much, much below the global average emissions, which means we have one of the smallest economies in the world. As of 2019, we were talking about only 2.4 billion. Agriculture still is the dominant industry for Bhutan. And I know there were, in the recent news articles, there were talks about agriculture not doing enough or agriculture not being productive enough. Over the last 20 or so years, despite all our youth leaving to Australia, we have in fact grown up on an upward trajectory in terms of population. We have been growing, which means our consumptions have also been rising. Everything from our fossil fuel imports to our food imports have skyrocketed. Everything is on an upward trajectory, which means that as a country, we have not also shifted at the right pace. We have not brought in systemic changes at the right time. So against this background, the question we have to ask, whether we are a government or whether we're in academia or whether we're in civil society, is how do small countries like Bhutan, or for that matter, any country in the world, secure prosperity in the face of uncertainty? So today, with a lot of humility, I want to pitch 8 key things for Bhutan. First thing, I think we need to decarbonize our transport sector. I say that not only from a carbon point of view, but also from an economic perspective. Today, the profits which Bhutan makes from hydropower is only about close to $100 million US dollars. We, in fact, import close to $150 million US dollars worth of fossil fuel. So there is a clear, compelling case for us to decarbonize our transport sector. Now, in the short term, it could mean electric vehicles. Now we have heard all these problems with lithium being mined from Indonesia. I don't think we have a choice. Till the next breakthrough technologies are there, we need to plan for the next 10 to 20 years. Okay, get in the electric cars, support scientific institutions to make the next breakthroughs. That's the only way I think we can do it. We have to transform Bhutan's built environment. This has been an energy sink. Bhutan actually produces a lot of energy. I think you have heard this before, but in the winter we need to re-import electricity, and our buildings are one of the biggest consumers of energy. Estimates which have been done by the government pitch our savings close to 14 million per annum, 14 million US dollars. If we get our buildings right, we can save about close to 14 million. So we have a real incentive to really look at our building sector and see where can we make the biggest changes. We need to, of course, we need to upscale renewables, and we need to look beyond hydropower. Whether it be solar, whether it be wind, or people are also talking about hydrogen. I know that big institutions like the DGPC are already getting their act into hydrogen. But we need to look at this carefully. But it doesn't mean we do not need to move. We have to make the next move. We need to look at our food systems a bit more carefully in Bhutan. Food is also one of the biggest emitters of carbon. But also, I think, unlike many other people complaining that the food sector is not making the required giving the required economic dividends for Bhutan, the way I look at it, agriculture will be the dominant sector for the next 10 to 20 years, unless we do something radically different. Close to 60% of our Bhutanese farmers still rely on the agri-food sector. We have to reinvest back in the agri-food sector. And despite all the things we have done so far, there's still persistent poverty. And I think agriculture could be the game changer. We also have, because of issues related to climate change and beyond, like human-wildlife conflict and all that, Bhutan has an immense amount of fallow land, 22,000 hectares. Our estimates show that we can plant close to 11 plus million trees on these lands. Even if you talk about $50 per tree in the long run, we are talking about close to $500 million annually. That's 1/4 of our current GDP. That's huge. That could be a game changer. The next imperative, we have to upscale an economy around nature. Now, everybody is talking about carbon financing. We need to really look at what are the mechanisms we can get paid for the carbon we have here, the net carbon. How do we do that? Like Namgyo was mentioning in the previous talk, we cannot just go and say we're carbon negative. We need to get our stats right. We need to get our pitch right. And we need to make sure that we are somehow compensated for the poverty which is still here in this country. Next, please. Next slide. Okay, yeah, we need to upscale an economy around nature, and one of the things I think would be worthwhile doing in Bhutan is to pitch this idea of build with wood. I know that many of us are conservationists, we don't like cutting trees, but sustainable forest management will need to be one big focus area. This is a bridge in Canada, it's a forest bridge. I think many of our bridges, rather than building with steel, could be built with engineered wood. How many rural bridges are there? And we need to look at, I think these modern technologies are available. I think we need to bring these in, kickstart with a Build with Wood initiative for Bhutan. Of course, nothing to do with carbon change, and again, everything to do with carbon and climate. I think we need to reform our education system, and I think work is going on. We need to accelerate science and education, and like our previous Prime Minister was talking about Bodhisattvas, I was so inspired, by the way. We need to get compassion and courage back to where we are. We need to talk about innovation. We need to create the next generation of leaders who have not only the technology, but the courage to face the next future. Coming to the immediate needs, we have seen that there's going to be glacial outlake floods, so we need to now have a plan to secure critical infrastructure. I don't know whether we have it yet or not. With the earthquakes in Turkey, I think it's all the more important that Bhutan already has a comprehensive plan. In case something like that happens, do we have our acts together? What are our plans? And of course, at the end, it all boils down to financing. We need to secure financing. And the estimates are already there. If you look at the low emission development strategy, we are talking close to $1 million USD per annum over the next 30 years. And the 100 million is only about 3% of our current GDP. And covering all sectors, from food to industries to disaster, so on and so forth. I know that currently the UN is helping us make our adaptation plan. The cost estimates are not yet there, but how much will it cost for adaptation? And we need to rally as much as possible to make sure that we have the required finances to do all that which is required. And there has been talk about instituting the Bhutan Climate Fund. I don't know how far the work is on, but maybe we need to, again, focus on instituting the climate fund, either tie it up with the Bhutan Trust Fund, because the trust fund is already there. And particularly for small countries and small institutions like us, we need to radically remove barriers. So we have institutions like the Green Climate Fund, we have institutions like the Adaptation Fund, but it's quite next to impossible to really get money out of there. And if you don't get the money now, time is running out. And this is my ending slide. So what can civil society do? As civil society, we have to take advantage of our agility and take advantage of our capacity to catalyze a coordinated approach to address climate change. Thank you so much.